ladies, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about something a bit different. It's going to be a bit different, more of a story time and chit chat and a bit of my story and my experience, living a life abroad, and more specifically there will be a few points that I want to talk about when it comes to human nature and cultures. How does human nature relate to the culture you live in? And how does feminine energy relate to the culture you live in, societies, tradition, all of this kind of stuff? So if you are European, if you are American, if you're Canadian, if you have lived abroad, if you are an immigrant, or if you've had an international background somehow, you'll be interested in the few points we have to make about this. So this will be a bit longer maybe. So grab a coffee, and if you have time, then listen. If not, it's probably better when you have time because it won't be super to the point right away. So as some of you know, I am born and raised in Mexico. My parents are Mexican. So, they themselves had lived in France when they were younger. They studied, their master's degrees in France, in Paris. And somehow our circle was always very international, and our circle always was of people who studied abroad, traveled a lot, lived abroad. So naturally, since I was very, very young, like we traveled a lot, and I always knew that I wanted to live abroad, just like my parents and just like many of the other people in these types of circles. So in these types of circles, the maybe 10%ers, 1%ers, the educated crowd, lots of entrepreneurs, but most importantly, educated, they're all about living abroad. And it's part of your education. And being cultured is when you can call yourself educated in Latin America, in these types of circles. So without going too much into that, the first time that I lived abroad was when I was 16, and I was an exchange student with AFS in Sweden for a year. So I lived there with a family, and I went to high school, and like I lived the life of a Swedish teenager. I was 16 at the time, and to me it was so exciting in that I was really, really eager and keen to learn about different ways of living, and somehow I really thought it was gonna be so different. And one of my parents' friends that lived in France as well, they met in school back then, she told me, she kind of said it like, you're going to be a bit disappointed, because she's like, people are people everywhere. And I was kind of hoping that, I don't know, that I found the rainbow after, with the gold pot. Like, I was really expecting like to find some kind of paradise. Like, I just thought that there, of course, there had to be more to, life in Mexico. Naturally, I wanted to explore the world, and I wanted my world to be richer and this and that, right? But I was really hoping it was better. And one of the things that you are to learn with intercultural exchanges is that life in different countries is not better or worse necessarily, it's different. And for a while I was like, oh, okay. So for a while I didn't get it. And maybe now that I'm 39 years old, I get it a lot more. So I don't know, the part that might be interesting for you to hear is relationships. How is it different? How is it different in Sweden? Okay, so me coming from one of the most traditional, and there's a lot of polarity in Mexico. Human nature is very raw there. And I'll explain what I mean. Human nature is very raw there in Mexico, in that not only are people very real there, but they're very close to their human nature. So suffice to say that women there, back when I grew up there, so it's different now, and I can talk about that. Of course, it's different now because feminism has now been a new thing there in the last maybe 10, 20 years. There's been the first wave of feminism there. Whereas in Europe, you saw your first wave of feminism like 3-4 generations ago, right? So naturally in Mexico, women are very traditional. Men are very traditional in the sense that family is a huge thing there. People don't really operate as individuals. It's more so a society of where the family unit is the base of the society. So when you are gonna marry, and this is more true the higher the social class or caste you are from in Mexico. So the higher your social class there, and I've seen this to be true in the US as well, the more it matters which families mix. It's not so much about you as an individual marrying whoever you want. It's more so about what families joined forces or mix or whatever. So I came from that background of the family unit being really, really strong, but in a different way. In Sweden, the family unit is strong, but it was different. In Sweden, what immediately I liked more than where I came from was that the family had more of a team democratic feeling. So the children had an opinion, which is not something that in Mexico that was really the case. It's more like parents told you what to do and you don't really have an opinion. I don't think critical thinking is at the heart of that dynamic. Whereas in Sweden, there was a bit more of that critical thinking, dialogue, and, democracy sort of feeling to things. So that immediately caught my attention, and I thought it was a better way of living. But now, again, I can talk about this for centuries, right? But let's, move on. So that was the thing. And the other thing I've mentioned in my other videos is that, of course, I was like blown away, and just it was a paradise that I expected when I saw that women there were about career. Okay? And listen until the end. Like, there's a lot more to this. So growing up in Mexico, I had, mom and dad. My mom, even though she was a psychologist, a researcher of human nature and relationships and dynamics and stuff, she was a stay-at-home mom, and she was feminine energy incarnate. Okay? Just like many other Mexican women, just the way most Mexican women are or were up until I grew up there. And, not every society is perfect. And I'll tell you that the Mexican society also needed balance in that aspect. Because even though the Mexican women are feminine energy incarnate, too much feminine energy, contrary to popular belief perhaps, is not good. And why do I say this? They're lacking masculine energy for sure, because a lot of them don't know how to take care of themselves, and I mean financially, in the event that that was required or needed. Kind of like your husband died, now what? And it's not like there you have all this like social, security, or what do you call it, like money from the government, or even like complex insurance. Like over there you don't have like a social network in that regard. So a lot of women in Mexico didn't have their masculine energy developed, and therefore when you don't have a masculine energy developed as well, or I don't know if developed is the right word, but we're going to use that word for now. So when you don't have that masculine energy that you know how and when to use in the event that you need it, then you're also lacking the dark energy, the dark feminine energy that you need to be successful in relationships. A woman that is scared to put her foot down and set boundaries and be really a bitch when she needs to be a bitch, if you will, right? She can't do that if she's afraid of going without. Kind of like, if I put boundaries with my husband that are really strong, he's gonna leave me and I'll be in the streets. So that's kind of like the vibe all across the Mexican society. Like, of course, I'm generalizing, and of course, that's not the norm for every single person. But I'm telling you the general vibe growing up, the norm of what is observed. So, women there are the example of feminine energy until they need that balance of the masculine in women too. So you come to Sweden, and lo and behold, of course, with 3 generations of feminism, masculine energy has been developed and overused at this point. How do I know this? Well, I'm telling you, part of the stuff that I've shared before, I was fascinated by my Swedish mom being a career woman. Of course, they have a different demeanor. They're completely different, right? She was a career woman, and she believed in marriage as pure partnership. I've talked about this before, where whenever I hear still, the first times I heard the word my partner, you know how that's used in the English language? Oh, so my partner did so. I was like, what the fuck is partner? What is that? You mean like your business partner, like an associate? Like, what do you mean by that? So that's what it was in Sweden, literally. And she explained that to me in her own words. Right? So their goal, sole goal, was to be business partners. So in a marriage, so as you guys know, I am a relationship coach, I'm a dating coach, and someone who has been married for almost 13 years now. I'll tell you that for sure. Like the heart of what I teach is you'll have a relationship, a marriage, and a marriage has all of that. It has partnership, it has friendship, it has romance, and therefore the polarity required to stay together in the long term satisfied. Because you can stay together in the long term and, you know, look in the side, and next thing you know, somebody's courting you and you start paying attention to a third party when there's no polarity in a marriage. So my Swedish mom and her husband, they were 100% partners, and there was no polarity. I've mentioned this before, how to me, one of the first things that I noticed was like, oh, like in a whole year, they slept with their door open, right? And my room was right next to theirs. And to me, it was like, oh, like, I know for a fact that my parents, they always had their door closed at night, and they very much had a polarity relationship, even despite their things and stuff, right? So naturally, you would think, oh, well, in theory, having a lifelong partner is great, but lo and behold, there's human nature, something you can't escape from. And your human nature, it needs other things. It needs romance. It needs all that animalistic stuff too. So, not too surprised when the guy is maybe addicted to porn. I don't know. Shouldn't be saying too much. But pure partnership is not something that necessarily will keep you satisfied as a human being over the long run. So how did the polarity go away in their marriage? Well, you could barely, if I was deaf and if I closed my ears or closed my eyes, and if you described what they, even what they looked like, what they did, you describe them and they're very, very similar. Like, who is the man and who's the woman? Like, maybe because he was taller, but if they were the same height, she had short blonde hair, kind of like similar to the guy, identical, in fact. They had the same haircut. But forget about that. What they did, not even their roles, because polarity is not about gender roles directly, but they were very similar. There was no dissimilarity. There's no difference between the man and the woman. They did the exact same things, both of them. They had the exact same energy. There wasn't a receiver, there wasn't a giver. Like, there wasn't any of that. There wasn't a dance, so to speak. So naturally, there's no polarity. There's no attraction. Okay? So that was another one of the things that, was different. And let's talk a little bit about a point that I wanted to make, which is what is socially acceptable versus what is human nature. So in Sweden, it was socially acceptable that men and women are identical, or they call it equal. It wasn't odd, versus in Mexico, they would be like, why is the woman kind of acting like the guy? Why is the woman looking like a man? Why is the woman so masculine? Versus in Sweden, that wouldn't even be questioned. So over there, it's totally socially acceptable. She paid 50% of the bills. He paid the other 50. Okay? practical, but uninteresting and unsatisfying to them. Okay? Because she, no matter how much she, no matter how much she said this works, you could tell the longing in her to be treated like, I'm not going to say a princess because it's going to sound trite at this point, but treated a certain way. She would ask me all the time, like, about my parents and their dynamic. And she would be like, oh, your dad still gives flowers to your mom? Wow. She'd be blown away by things like that. And she's like, oh, I guess you guys Latin cultures are so romantic. And I'm like, I guess because people there know human nature and know polarity. They don't know it like, people don't talk about polarity there because it just is. So they don't, like, it's rare that you talk to someone there and they'll be like, oh, hi, like, let's talk about polarity. Like, no one talks about that. So now let's talk about the most interesting part. So when I was 16, they're living in Sweden. I wasn't dating because to me, dating was useless because I was going to get attached to someone and I was too young to get married. I didn't see the point of getting attached when I wanted to live in all these different countries and blah, blah, blah. Okay. And I didn't see the point of like heartbreak or like, what was the point? I did hang out with friends, So the interesting part was when my Swedish friends, so you could see the ones that were more naturally mysterious, more naturally like in high demand because they were so beautiful, some of them. So they were naturally more like selective. They were, again, all totally naturally more, they had more boundaries, they're a bit more like princess slash bitch, if you will. They were more selective with who they were spending time with and B, sleeping with. So compared to the Swedish friends that were more, like loose, not too selective and sleeping with more people and just going from guy to guy, blah, blah, blah. You could see which ones were the ones that stayed single longer and chronically versus not, and the ones who didn't. So also the women that were more reserved in the, with their time and energy and what they were given to what men, they had different quality of relationships. So the same principles, the same stuff that they teach you in Mexico, because in Mexico, they teach you that growing up. They teach you as a girl not to be loose. They teach you as a girl to be hard to get, not to play hard to get, but to be hard to get. So the same stuff that I was taught in Mexico growing up, it was the same reality there in Sweden. Okay, except that it wasn't taught. It was kind of like something some people learned by trial and error, similar to here in North America or in Canada, that some people learn by trial and error, and some still don't learn at age 50 or 40. Maybe at age 50, they start to learn. So another thing, the women there will not say that they want to be married because it's socially acceptable to get together with someone and move in with someone, but secretly they are wishing for marriage. Why do I say this? Every single one of my Swedish friends got married because they all said that they wanted that from day one when they were with the guy that, you know, they fell for. So they all waited probably 10 years, centuries to get married just because it was socially accepted to live with someone. So they went against their human nature of wanting to feel safe. It is the single strongest need that a Homo sapiens woman has across cultures. So if you consider yourself a human woman, your need to be safe is there, whether you live in China, whether you live in Sweden, whether you live in the US, wherever. You may suppress that human nature of yours, as a society tells you to do in these countries like the US, Canada, Europe. They tell you, no, you want to feel safe? No, fuck that. You need to feel safe. Who do you think you are? Like, can't you work? You can work, right? You have 2 hands and 2 feet. You can work. You don't need a man to pay you shit. No. So even if you're pregnant and you know you're feeling sick in your 3rd trimester and your child is born sick or whatever, you don't feel well. No, you have to work. You don't need to feel safe. Fuck that. You have 2 feet and hands, right? So, to my surprise, the human nature, as my parents' friend has said, as she told me before I moved to Sweden, the human nature was the exact same thing, the exact same in Mexico than in Sweden. Some things were more socially acceptable in Sweden. Some things were more socially acceptable in Mexico. Let's give an example. So a jealous and a little more possessive man is more stereotypical of the Mexican men, macho men. Okay. So men in Sweden, they feel jealousy too, but over there, it's not socially acceptable to display controlling behaviors towards women. Versus in Mexico, it is socially acceptable to display these types of behaviors, as it is believed that a certain level of control, I didn't say all the way full blown, like in some countries, but a certain level of control is a masculine container, okay? The masculine provides the container, the structure, the control. So in Mexico, this is why it is more socially acceptable to be a man and display and not hide your feelings of jealousy. Do I agree with this? If it goes out of hand, if it's inappropriate, no, of course not. If I have a husband that shows he's jealous and or not jealous, it's not a good example. Kind of like he doesn't want me to go outside by myself and it's dark. Okay? He doesn't want to let me go by myself to a place because it's dark, and what are you doing there alone? Okay? So, yeah, some behaviors are more socially accepted in certain countries, right? In Sweden, it's socially acceptable to be a woman and sleep with whoever you want at any time, anywhere, but you will still be considered a slut, right? By the Swedish men privately. They will not shame you in public. They won't really say anything to you in public, but between them, you know, they'll say between the lines that, oh yeah, she's loose. So men are men in Sweden, men are men in Mexico. They're the same. They hide it more or less. Their things, their nature. Welcome to human nature. So I've gone on for like half an hour on this example of Sweden. And I'm going to make this talk maybe an hour. This one is important. So we're going to talk about how you can benefit from this. How you can come winning no matter what your culture says if you take into account human nature or human psychology or whatever you want to call it. So after Sweden, I lived in Argentina for almost 6 years. I went to university there. And the story was a bit similar to Sweden. Argentina is a very progressive nation where feminism has been there for a few more generations, maybe 2 or 3. Very European in many ways. And they would love to hear that it's a very European society. They love that. So once I finished university, I moved to Canada. I said, what country can I move to for good? Mind you, when I was very, very young, I knew that I wanted to marry a guy from a non-Latin culture. And I can say why in a separate video, because otherwise it would be super long, right? The gist of it is, I didn't really like the, so Latin cultures and some other cultures that are not Latin, it is socially acceptable where the family lives in your house, even if they don't literally physically live there. Like they run your life. The mommies run, like, you know, the mommy, they will run her son's life. She will be the woman in his life, kind of. So without going too much into that, I didn't want that for my life. But I mean, there's goods, and you know, it's not totally bad. There's good sides about that, and it was just not for me, right? Where you have your mother-in-law here all the time telling you what to do, blah blah blah. Like I was like, fuck that. So fast forward, I moved to Canada, and I was 26. So at that point, I was like, okay, I need to start thinking about getting married ASAP. So I need to start actually dating, like, intentionally. And I started doing circular dating. At the time, I wouldn't have called it that. Like, I didn't know it was called that. I just called it, I didn't call it anything because growing up, there wasn't a name for it. So I started, doing rotational dating or circular dating, whatever you want to call it. And of course, very, very quickly, lo and behold, I met my now husband. He was, one of the people that I was dating. And I remember a few things. So the point of this story is to tell you how you can have an advantage over all other females, potentially, by being more feminine, by being more traditional, by being different. Okay? So not only was I different physically, but forget that. I was more feminine than your average Canadian. Like, for one, I believed in marriage. Not only did I believe in marriage, but it was a requirement for me to live with someone. So one of the friends that I had here in Canada, she asked me, hey, when are you moving with so and so? When are you moving in? And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, moving, like, why would I, just help me understand, why would I move in with someone when I'm not married? Like, put myself off the market, remove myself from the market, so there's no commitment, no advantage to me. So mind you, some women think it's an advantage that the man will help her pay her bills. So she's thinking this is an advantage, but that's a topic for another video, right? So I was like, no. Why would I do that? And she's like, well, that's what we do here. And I'm like, well, I don't care, but men are men everywhere. And of course, I didn't move in with, Pierre and stuff until there was a conversation about marriage, about this being it. And it's not a conversation. So anyway, so this Canadian friend was surprised, and she thought that I was going to have a huge disadvantage. Of course I didn't, because I got a ring very, very shortly after I started dating Pierre. Couple months, or yeah, very, very soon, right? So the advantage that you have by having boundaries, by having requirements and standards to whatever it is you give, what is your requirement for that, right? So I will not give you my life and body and all of that, without being married to you and engaged and all that. So you might be afraid of putting your foot down because, oh, what, the guy's gonna go away. The wrong ones will. The one who is really into you, he will. So no, I didn't have to do as they do here. So they also told me another thing. Oh, the French Canadian are super liberal. like almost no one gets married there. They all just live together. Like, well, good for them. If he wants to be with me and I'm the one and all of that, he's gonna marry me. He's gonna feel very lucky to marry me. So needless to say, I was incredibly popular on the dating arena just by being more feminine than the other women. Not only feminine in, I'm not talking about the superficial aspect of it, right? But I'm talking about you being a receiver, allowing a man to treat you to dinners, having traditional values, like marriage and family. Because men, they crave that. They crave that in China, they crave that in Mexico, and they crave that in Canada. In fact, in Canada, a lot of men marry immigrant women or women whose parents are immigrants, like Asian is a huge one. I'm like, what is there a thing? Latinas, right? Why do these even, I'm not going to say Russian, but no. So they're known to marry foreign women because they're more traditional. And if you're thinking that by traditional, I'm saying a maid that cooks and cleans, you'd have to think again and dive deeper, because that's not what a feminine woman has to offer. There's, a whole lot of things that a feminine woman has to offer. So, hold on, here I wrote the main points for you. So to wrap this up, I have illustrated with some very, very long examples of my personal life experience internationally and globally of, the difference between what is socially acceptable versus human nature. If you understand this, if you're, for example, a German lady and you want to get married because it's time. So if you can understand that, yes, in your society, it's more socially acceptable to live and sleep with multiple men and it's all good. Yeah, that's fine. But you can also capitalize on your human nature, on your feminine energy state, and say, I crave the safety of the divine union, aka marriage. I crave the safety to be able to trust and fully surrender the masculine that I'm with. And lo and behold, you become a rarity. You become special and a gem in a sea of masculine women that have no boundaries, that suppress their human nature. Lo and behold, you're special and different because you embrace your human nature, aka your feminine energy. So that's my takeaway for you. If you live in Europe, if you live in the United States, if you live in Canada, in countries like Pakistan, India, Mexico, Peru, women know this. They use this more, what I'm kind of sharing with you here in this video. So my point of the video is share this knowledge of your human nature with you so that you can capitalize it. Which goes into my third point. my third point was that at the end of the day, you need to look out for yourself. You need to ensure you embrace your human nature to your advantage. Because human nature is also, let me tell you, human nature is also to be promiscuous. Why? Because the human nature wants to reproduce. It wants to breed. It wants to have offspring ASAP. So this is why when you get together with someone, this means you're being intimate emotionally, and then physically, you start attaching right away as a woman. It is also part of your wiring to come out with an offspring ASAP. But to be strong means to look at the long game, to look at the long term versus the instant gratification versus the, okay, I'm going to reproduce now. I'm going to have sex. I'm going to reproduce now. And we'll see later, right? The strong human nature wants you to mate and pair bond with someone in the long term so that your offspring can be provided and protected by its one father. So regardless of your culture, regardless of whether it's in style or not to sleep around and never settle down in a divine union in Germany or in France or in wherever you are, in the States, Canada, I invite you to honor the human nature of you that has your best interest at heart. The long game that will allow you to be in your feminine and feel safe and satisfied in the long term. So that's kind of my recap for you. The second point was that capitalize on being different and being more feminine than, the women around you. Of course, this wouldn't apply in a Middle Eastern country because they are more feminine, like they don't need that because they are more feminine. But in the Western world, in the cultures that are Caucasian or Saxon, what is it called? Whatever you call it, you're gonna need that competitive edge by being more feminine and staying close to your human nature. So anyway, ladies, it's been quite a bit. I hope you found this useful. Let me know in the comments, where are you from? I know we have some people from Europe following, but please let me know in the comments which country are you watching from. So you guys have a wonderful night or day.